Hello world, and we are back. My name's Kyle Fischl. This is going to be episode 178 of my poker vlog. For this one, I play a 2-5 session at Coconut Creek in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. A bit of a drive from where I'm located. I have a ton of fun hands to go over, but before we get into it, if you're unable to meet with me throughout my travels across Florida and elsewhere, I'm constantly playing on Club GG. Have any interest with playing with me on the online streets? Message me through either Instagram or Telegram, get you set up, even get you the ability to play with me on stream as I stream sometimes the games as well.
And who bets that small with an ace? Like, honestly, who would do such a thing? And there's so many flush draws, everything bricked. I think it's just a call if he goes for it. Let's see it. Told you, it's just a call if he goes for it. It makes no sense what he's saying. Makes no sense. You can't bluff someone who doesn't care, who just hates money, who's here to distribute it to the fans, you know. Can't bluff the guy who's dumb at poker.
And with that out of the way, let's roll the tape.
First hand of note. We sit out the 1-2 table at Coconut Creek as we wait for a 2-5 seat to open. And on the first hand, with a button straddle, there's one limp. I'm in early position with Jack 8 of hearts. Didn't drive all the way to Coconut Creek to fold suited gappers, so I raised to $20. Button straddler folds, everyone else folds, only the limper decides to call, so we're heads up to a flop of Queen 5-4 rainbow with one heart. I think it's a board I can c-bet at a pretty high frequency. Queen's gonna interact with me a lot. If my opponent has a middling pocket pair, it's gonna be hard to hold on through multiple bets, and he could have just completely missed this board. So I continuation bet for $30. My opponent does not give up. He puts in the call, and the turn is the 3 of diamonds. Honestly, a pretty bad one for my exact hand. One that should interact with a limp caller a lot more than me. But in the moment, I thought my opponent really just had a few floats. He had maybe a king jack that folds to the second barrel, an ace X. Maybe pocket sevens gives up now, although they have a gut shot, so that's a little hard. But for whatever reason, I choose to throw out a second barrel of $55.
It's so dumb.
It's so dumb, it's brilliant.
No! It's just dumb.
Start this day by laying on the pressure, and my opponent eventually calls. Now I'm just totally giving up. My opponent clearly has a queen. I really can't get a win on this one. Until the river is the ace of hearts. I think this actually opens the door for me. I think if I had ace king, I might throw out 2 barrels and then just bet when I have an ace. So this might be one of the few runouts where a triple barrel bluff actually makes sense. I think the 2 previous bets narrowed my opponent down to like a queen jack, queen 10 type hand, and we're going to put those hands to the test with a $100 bet. As I announce the bet and move the chips forward, my opponent folds very quickly. Start out the day with a fun little win, triple barreling with air. Following that, I'm in the cutoff with 9-10 of diamonds with 2 limps. I raised to $15. The button and both limpers decide to call, so we end up going 4 ways to a flop of ace jack 4 rainbow with the jack of diamonds. So when 2 early position players just limp call, they really never have a strong ace ever. I think this board interacts with my typical raising range a lot harder. Additionally, with both the backdoor straight draw and backdoor flush draw, I think there's just a ton of cards that I can continue barreling on. So I start out with a bet of $45, over half pot, really trying to get some folds here. Well, the dealer button's all in for $43. Well, I guess I'm already in for that bet, but that clears out everyone else, so hopefully I hit some backdoors. Jack of clubs turn is not going to give me any equity, and the 4 of spades does not help either, and I was turned dead when my opponent has ace jack, so he chose not to 3-bet that hand, flops gin, and gets someone to bluff into him.
I don't understand this at all, so Angie caught me, and now the game's just over?
So bluffing giveth and taketh away. We're about even. Win another small pot at the 1-2 table before I'm called to the 2-5, where the larger stacks of green are available to be won. On the first interesting hand here, I have Jack 8 of diamonds from the cutoff. With an under the gun limp, middle position raises to 20. I decide to call. The big blind plus the limper call, so we end up going 4 ways to a flop of 8-6-3 with 2 spades. Flopping top pair, good kicker, seems decent. It's a board that should connect with me more often as I'm a caller versus a raiser. And apparently the pre-flop aggressor agrees as he checks it all the way to me. I'm not going to let this check through. My hand definitely requires some protection. Would love to thin the field with just a top pair. So I bet $40, exactly half pot. Would love to just take it down now. But the under the gun player is not going to make it easy for me. He makes the call. and the turn is the 4 of spades. Pretty disastrous. Obvious flush draw gets there, straight draw, 2 pairs, everything. When my opponent checks to me, I'm going to check this back. When the river is the 9 of clubs, my opponent throws out a bet of $50. I think this is a pretty trivial call, getting a pretty good price. I don't have to write too often, and I do beat hands like 7-8, 6-7, 4-5. Plenty of single pair holdings I'm ahead of, so I make the call. This time I'm against multiple pairs. My opponent has 6-4 offsuit.
You dim-witted, brainless jackass!
So that 4 turn card was indeed a very bad one for my hand. So now our stacks look a little shabby. We top up. We are now into the game for 1,300 when we add on more chips from this stack. Before the next hand of note. I'm in the big blind with ace-4 of diamonds. When the hijack makes it $20, the cutoff, the button, small blind, all decide to call, so I'm going to complete here. Would be a pretty sick squeeze play, probably the perfect time for it, but I think my hand plays fine multi-way. Going for some flush over flushes for stacks, but apparently that's unnecessary as the flop is ace-4 deuce rainbow.
That is quite a piece.
So I see.
With 1 diamond. So we get 2 pair, get a backdoor flush draw, have this entire board locked up. Hopefully we're against like an ace-jack, ace-10, ace-queen hand and we can get a lot of money in. Either way, without the betting lead, I'm going to go for a check, as I would with pretty much all my hands. Almost no leads. When the hijack checks, I'm very upset. Would love to see him throw out a c-bet. He's the most likely one to have a strong ace. Cutoff checks. His hand gets a lot worse if it goes 5 ways to a turn card. But the button doesn't disappoint me when he puts out a bet of $25. Even better, the small blind calls. Well, I can't call and let this go 5 ways to a turn card. Have to raise, have to start building a pot. Plenty of bad turn cards. Deuce, a 3, a 5, a 6. All somewhat dicey. As well as a 10 plus makes 2 pair over 2 pair happen some of the time. So we're going to charge our opponents right now. I raised to $90. Hijack folds, cutoff folds. Button decides to call. Okay, maybe he actually has something. He wasn't just stabbing with air. Then the small blind calls as well. So we're going 3 ways to a turn card. Is it too much to ask for a diamond on the turn to make my job even easier? Well, I guess not, as the turn is the 7 of diamonds. When it checks to me, same logic as the flop. We have a strong hand, but a vulnerable hand. Ace-jack plus is pretty much always paying us. And we want to get the pot to a good size where we can jam on any diamond river or 4 ace where we can get stacks in pretty easily. So I size up a bit. $200 will be the bet here. And both players fold pretty much before I even get my chips out there. So maybe check raising into 5 people and then betting turn is just too strong of a line to ever get paid. Either way, I'll happily take the win. After that, we look down at King, Queen of spades in the hijack. When I raise to $20, the button, the small blind, and the big blind decide to call. So we end up going 4 ways to a flop of King, 5, deuce, rainbow. No spades. But top pair, good kicker. When it checks to me, think betting small here, massively multi-ways, always the best option. If I got my opponent to fold like ace-10 here, that's a huge pickup. Get value from like 7s, 8s, 9s, all that stuff. So $45, a little bit over half pot, as we don't want to make it too cheap for anyone to chase with like middling pairs to get 2 pairs like on the first hand. On the $45 bet, the button decides to call. Pretty much the person I wanted to call the least, as he gets only one who gets to play in position with me. Both blinds fold. We are heads up to a turn card, which is the 7 of spades. Besides 5, 7, and pocket 7s, seems like a pretty big brick. Seems like I can go for some pretty pure value against worse kings. Maybe 3, 4 pays me. And all middling pocket pairs besides 7s will probably pay off a second bet. So I bet smaller on this time because we're heads up. Don't need to go too large with it. My opponent's either has a ton of equity or is drawing pretty slim to 5 or less outs. So I bet $75. My opponent calls pretty quickly, so we're hoping for another dud of a river card. But we get a 4 of diamonds. I think you can make the argument here for going for some thin value, but at that point you're really just hoping for king jack, king 10 to pay you off. Don't think middling pocket pairs calls a bet for 3 streets. And my opponent could easily have like 4, 5, even 7, 5 played kind of weakly. I don't know, in the moment this reminded me of the 6-4 hand where my opponent just had a random undercard 2 pair. And so I go for a bit of pot control here. I check with intentions of check calling, but my opponent pretty quickly checks it back. That's bad news for me. It means that he probably has some level of showdown value, might have called a bet.
You're angry.
So when I show the king queen, of course it is good. I'm kicking myself a little bit after this hand for not going for some thin value on the river. Things continue to roll smoothly, a win another small one before the next interesting hand. I'm in the small blind with queen 10 of clubs, and when there's one limp, a middle position player raised to $30. Definitely a bigger size than we've seen at this table. I hadn't seen anyone go higher than 20. Even though those are limp, this guy went a little bit bigger with it. Somewhat interesting. One late position player calls to 30. I'm happy to take this one multi-way. When the big blind folds, the limper calls. So we end up going 4 ways to a flop of ace, 8, 5, all clubs. We flop a flush on an ace high board, which is also pretty good. Opponents can easily have like ace, king, 1 club, ace, jack, 1 club, and a bunch of just aces that they're not willing to fold to one or multiple bets. When I check in flow, the pre-flop aggressor throws out a bet of $30. Continues. I was going to just call this until the late position player decides to call as well. We don't want 2 players. Either one can just have the naked king of clubs to get to see the turn for a cheap price. We are charging our opponents to draw. We are charging our opponents if they have a pair of aces. We are raising and charging our opponents. I'm making $110. Don't want to go too big. Just trying to get as much money in there now while I'm pretty confident I have the best hand. When I make it 110, my opponent looks back at his cards, throws them in the middle, and then the other opponent throws them in the middle as well.
No.
So my raises are getting a lot of folds at this table. Not getting a whole lot of value, but we are winning hands, so I guess we'll take it.
Listen, I want to be clear. Huh? I'm not Batman.
Following that, I am under the gun with pocket aces, the best pre-flop hand possible. I raised to $20. Please, someone 3-bet. I would love to see it happen. Well, +1 just calls. Late position just calls. And everyone else starts to fold. Big blind, you gonna help me? Nope, they fold too. Don't really want to go 3 ways with aces, but here we are. Flop is 9-6-4, pretty bad for aces, but we do have an overpair with limited nut advantage, but a decent hand. We're going to put in some money. I continuation bet for $30. Any 9, most pocket pairs, 5-3, 7-5, 8-7. A lot of hands that can call and are way behind. To $30, the player to my direct left folds, but then the late position player decides to call. All right, can we see a disconnected turn card? Not this time. 7 of diamonds. Pretty bad, all things considered. I check, and my opponent throws out a bet of $60. I didn't check aces on somewhat of a dicey board to fold. We're going to call. Hopefully he has some kind of strong 9 on this board. When I call, the river is the 7 of clubs. I really like this one. I now beat 6-4, 9-6. Middling pocket pairs probably feel kind of safe on this run out as well. So when I check and my opponent throws out a bet of $90, I just snap call. Never really folding here. Not really much to discuss. And he says, "You called?" with kind of a question mark. And I assume I'm good now. Say yes. And then he shows 10-8 offsuit. Well, okay. Call flop with nothing but a gut shot and just bang the crap out of it on the turn.
Don't. See that? This one up there. Very good. Very good.
Twice, really. River, too. Oh, well. Nice hand. Aces have been cracked at Coconut Creek. I am in middle position with ace-jack of diamonds with a button straddle. The small blind limps the $10. I raise up to 40 because I've suited ace-jack. Seems good enough to raise. The button and the limper calls, so we end up going 3 ways to a flop of 10-6-3 rainbow with 1 diamond. When it checks to me, if I'm going to bet small with overpairs, I can easily bet small with ace-jack specifically. Backdoor straight draw, backdoor flush draw, over cards. Any queen, king, jack, ace, diamond, turn card, I can throw in a lot of pressure. So we're going to start with a $40 bet. My opponents are willing to call with just gut shots. I am actually ahead of those holdings right now. So pretty happy to throw out this $40. And to this bet, the buttons folds pretty quickly. Small blind takes his time thinking for a bit before he folds as well. So this is just an example of how c-betting can win pots sometimes.
Yeah, okay, fine, yeah.
Next hand of note. We pick up the action on the flop because I button straddle with 3 limps, look down at the 8-3 offsuit, 8 of spades, 3 of hearts, and I check because I'm not betting this one. Flop comes 8-4-3 with 2 spades. Flopping 2 pairs. Amazing, and now we gotta start rolling the camera pretty quickly. Big tell, big tell. When it checks to me, I throw out $25. Gonna put some money in there. I have 2 pair. Small blind calls, and then the middle position player raises to 100. Because it's a limp pot, I guess he could have pocket 4s. I guess you have 3-4, 5-6, 2 spades. Many holdings. We have position. We're not folding, but 3-betting a flop seems a little bit overplayed. So we make the call. Small blind folds, and now we pretty much don't have to worry about anything when the turn is the 8 of clubs. Even more so when my opponent checks to me. Gonna bet small here, want to put some money in the middle. We have a full house. If my opponent has 5-6 or 2 spades or really just any pocket pair, we want to keep putting money in the middle. I bet $150. My opponent shows the table that he has 3-4 offsuit and then throws it down. So because he showed, I'll show. Octo Crab for the win. He's pretty happy with that turn card. Saved him a bunch of money.
I'm very bad at dumb things. My Achilles heel.
Next hand of note. We looked down at pocket aces for the second time. This time in the +1 position. Under the gun raises to $20. I'm 3-betting aces because they're aces. I make it $65. The small blind decides to cold call. Really didn't expect that. I really wish he would have raised. Then we could just get it in, but he calls. And that brings the under the gun player along as well. So we're going 3 ways with aces a second time. This time the board is a lot safer for aces. It's 4-4-3 with 2 clubs. We do have the ace of clubs, so not too worried about flush draws. What we are worried about is the small blind leading for $125. Folds to me. Really not sure exactly what to make of this. Like, leads are always so strong. I guess he would lead to try to protect a 4, afraid of a flush draw. Maybe he'd lead with a flush draw. Maybe he'd lead trying to protect 5s plus. Part of me wants to raise here for if my opponent has like 7s and the turn is a 10, it might be hard to get any more value from that. But I choose to just call here because he shouldn't have too many flush draws in range, especially when I have the ace of clubs. And a 4 is just never folding, so we decided to make the call here. And the turn is the 4 of diamonds. So now we have the actual second nuts. Any 4 is now quads, but that seems kind of unlikely at this point. When my opponent checks to me, I never really expect him to have a 4. Mostly because it's unlikely, but also there's a high hand promotion here. So if he had like 4-5, he would need to bet now to save himself from getting his kicker counterfeit. And then if he had like 7s, 8s, 9s, I expect that to bet on this board. So I really don't know what he has besides just a 3 maybe. I decided to check this one back. My bets have been getting a lot of folds. Would like to go for some value on the river, play a little bit deceptively on this one. When I check it back, the river is the deuce of spades. Well, now if he had 5-6, that gets there, so I'm kind of happy with my check back at this point. Additionally, if he had clubs for some reason, he might decide to bluff at it here, but my opponent checks to me. Well, I have the best hand. I have to bet. Have to go small. Maybe he just stabbed thinking that this was a board better for him with complete air and then gave up, but gotta put some money in the middle. I throw out a bet of $200, and my opponent again shows pretty nice table. This time he shows king, queen of clubs. So flop to flush draw, went for 1 C bet, turned dead. Not sure he's going to pay off a bet with that specific turn card, but that apparently was our only chance to get value on this one. And for a final hand of note, I'm under the gun with 6-7 of diamonds. I raised to $20. The hijack button and big blind decide to call, so we're going 4 ways to a flop again. Seems to be the theme here at Coconut Creek. And this board comes 7-5-5 rainbow with 1 diamond. As I'm the preflop aggressor, this shouldn't connect me too much. I have all the overpairs, and I want to thin the field a bit, so that's what leads me to throw out a bet here. A little under half pot, I throw out $35. I think my opponents are going to miss a ton of the time and just fold, just like the ace-jack hand on the 10-6-3 board. But to this $35, the hijack decides to call. Blocking a 7 makes me think that he's heavily weighted towards a 5 at this point, so really hoping I turn a diamond or a straight card. When the other 2 players fold, we are heads up to a turn card, which is the 7 of spades. Seems like a pretty good situation when you're confident your opponent has trips and you just turn full house over full house, at least in my mind anyway. I think that a 5 is never going to check back when they fill up, when my hand looks very similarly to like an ace-x hand with just a c-bet stab. So I check it to my opponent with the plans of check raising, and he does not disappoint. Throwing out $75, we get to spring the trap. We're pretty confident he has a 5 here, but we want to go small because players have been folding to my raises all day, and I think my hand looks a lot like a 7 or maybe aces and kings sometimes with this exact line. So I raised to 175. My opponent calls pretty quickly. Turn is the 9 of hearts. Somewhat neutral card. If my opponent for some reason had 6-8, he might be inclined to call a bet, but if he had a random 7, 7-9 is definitely in range, which is somewhat dicey, but I suppose we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. Final time today where I throw out $200. Been folded every time I've put it out today. This time, this opponent has had enough of it. He's finally going to see my cards, see what I'm playing. This time I'm playing the 7-6, and he just pushes his hand into the middle. We take down the biggest pot of the day. Biggest hand for me. Happy that it went my way, and this leads us to being in the game for 1,300.
Wait. What do we win?
Out of the game for $2,053, which is a profit of $753. Across 3 hours equates to $251 an hour, or 50 big blinds an hour.
Yeah, I think today actually ran pretty good. Haven't ran well in a while, so it's nice to be able to have one day of basically making your hand every time you're playing. Getting aces twice also helps. One time it gets cracked to where I'm turned dead, which obviously not what you want with aces. The other time the pot was slightly bigger and I turned my opponent dead, so, you know, win some, lose some. Either way, happy to book a win. If you liked the video and my form of content, please consider subscribing. Helps me out a great deal, and I will see you on the next one.